Welcome to Melbourne One TV and especially to our special guest, Antonella Papa. So she runs her own transformation in action business, and she also does counselling, massaging. She teaches counselling. So primarily her focus is on hypnotherapy. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. So we're very fortunate to have you with us today. And she has a very big interest as well in and specialises in anxiety management. So we're covering significant questions today about bullying as well. So I want to start off by asking you though first, what drives your passion to have this focus in this particular area, and what are you trying to achieve as well?
Yeah, trying to achieve. I love that word. Trying to live, let's say. My background is obviously coming from a cold background. I came from Italy where we were in the 70s. I was subject to a lot of bullying as a child, believe it or not. And I'm still getting that feedback. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know why, but it's coming back at me. It doesn't matter. I'll continue and try and see if I can focus. Yeah, no, that's okay. I'll continue. Yeah, what drives me is that coming from that background and coming here very, very young and only our own immediate family and having to adjust to a new lifestyle and a new place and a new area, having suffered with anxiety and depression too in my later teens. And then postnatal depression with my first child. I'm a mother of 5 children, and so I've been there down that road many, many times. So it inspires me because I was personally affected, and I came out the other end, so to speak. And I just want to tell the world about it. I want to try and help every person I can. It's just who I am. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that as well. And I'm sure there's lots of people out there who are struggling or have similar things that they would like to address as well and require support too. So, but before we actually go into more detail about that, how is bullying defined, or how can we actually describe what it is?
It's a huge subject, and it's sometimes very, very subtle. It's defined. Sometimes you can't even define it. It's that subtle. But I guess for me, it's an ongoing, deliberate sort of misuse of power between people. It could be groups. It could even be, especially on social media these days, as you know, how crazy it is there, especially with our girls. A lot of our young girls are subject to a lot of bullying, especially through that realm of I'm better than you. So it's terrible. It's been around since I was as long as I can remember. I think it's better handled these days, but as long as I can remember, it's been an issue. And yeah, so do you know what I mean? Like, have you experienced that yourself personally?
I think there's, some misunderstanding sometimes as well. Like you mentioned, bullying is so broad, and what is it? And it does also tie in with attitudes and, people's approaches to knowing and having those good relationships and being respectful with one another. But, some people also get confused between bullying and harassment. Do you think they're similar, or how do they differ from one another?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a difference between bullying and harassment. I think bullying personally is a little bit more subtle, and it usually happens between, let's say, the power in the relationship between, like, let's aim at young boys.
Yeah.
It usually happens more with young boys, believe it or not, in the school settings, probably from the age of about 8, even before that, depending on how a person behaves or is. And it's especially targeted at some children who are different, whether that may be, they're a little bit bigger than the average person, they don't fit that box. So unfortunately, the peer pressure is what causes it. The difference between the two, how can we say? Harassment, it's more like sexist and racism, discrimination, that sort of thing, where bullying is more like a hidden thing, more private, where it's not usually known or talked about, especially in front of the person that they're picking on.
Yeah, so the people around that person might not even know what they're going through. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I remember very, very well being bullied when I first came here when I was 9. So I am a huge advocate for that section and that sector.
Now, this is going a little bit off topic, but it's still tying in with bullying. What do you personally think of banter? Now, banter is, some people joke around saying it's okay to make jokes, but eventually I've seen that it can actually turn into a form of, picking on each other, especially with children, and some children might not know where to stop.
Yeah.
What do you think? Should children be encouraged or, explained how it can affect other people around them as well?
Yeah, I think that's what's lacking. And in our children's school, school ground and playground where they're there, and it's not really monitored or really, really discussed as much as it should be. Excuse me. Sorry, what was that question?
So I guess we're going into strategies now. What types of things can be done to manage kindness and acceptance and, inclusion, especially at a young age?
Goodness, I mean, it starts with the home firstly. I think a bully is bullied personally, and so it needs to start from the home firstly, but then obviously having the education at school, having talks about it, lots of talks, lots of information. I think sometimes it's the key, and that's what's not really happening. If I get popular picking on you because I get more mates by, like you said, doing the banter, where do we draw the line and say, no, this is going too far? And it depends on the different personality types too in these young children. And I personally think that these days we're not as resilient to it. We're a lot more soft, let's say, because there is so much on bullying at most schools. Would you not agree that they have plans put in place that prevents it? Yeah.
Yeah, and previously you mentioned as well, you touched on peer pressure. So how does that impact bullying behaviour?
Heaps a lot, because you want to fit into your group, and quite often there's it's called a hierarchy of man, where you've got that one child who's that little bit louder and popular, and he's your friend, and you want to please that friend. So it's very subtle sometimes, but it's definitely something to talk about. I think there's a zero tolerance these days to bullying. Depending on how extreme it is, and unfortunately, online a lot of the times, the child, or they don't tell their parents because they feel like they are pussies. Let's say, or you're telling your mum, and so they try and handle it themselves, and it's becoming a huge problem.
Right. Or even, I've heard of people who feel like, they want to own it, or they want to take care of it on their own. So definitely a big part of that is related to that. So if we want to try and help, people who are being bullied, are there strategies for adults that they can redirect that bullying behaviour?
Absolutely. Make sure you've got a really strong, positive relationship with teachers in school for a start, and get proactive. Talk.
Yeah.
And hopefully get your child to talk, because that's the trick, not knowing. A lot of the times you don't know until later, and you recognise some of the key areas could be that your child is displaying signs of being more withdrawn, they're not happy, and they don't want to necessarily tell you. But definitely speak to the teachers. Teachers in the school.
But what if that child, let's say, comes up to you and told that, if they went and approached an adult that they didn't find it helpful at all, what could be the next step for them?
It's really a poor put off for this poor young person, but that does often happen because, of one reason or another. I think I would just, as a parent, get involved and try to encourage and support the child or the person. And again, I would assume that they would talk to someone else, or I would certainly help them do that.
So how are different groups, such as, let's say, ethnic minorities, asylum seekers, or even disabled pupils, how can they be affected by bullying? Would it be different to their other peers in a classroom, let's say?
Yeah, because of the fact that you're not getting the message across. There's even less clarity around what's going on, because they're probably trying to settle into this new country, and the systems, it was very different for me. And I can only talk about my experience coming here, and Lord, how are you, my name? I couldn't even communicate. And then you had, back in the day, that used to be the Aussies against the Wogs. I'm sure you've heard that. And I was the Wog. So, and I honestly didn't even know whether I was a girl or boy or what. I was very much, if you looked at me in my teens when I was very young, I was like a little boy. I certainly didn't know what I was. So when you're expected to fit in a box of society, it usually happens to, let's call them our beautiful misfits, and I'm one of them. When we're little, I think it's really about and I think that's what's probably missing in our school system now, finding that group that doesn't feel heard. Teach them how to be heard, how to love themselves as they are, unique and different. So, yeah, I think these days it's much better to be at school these days than it was back in my days, because there certainly wasn't anything done. I copped the strap for a lot of the times or not knowing why. So capital punishment, I think, was in the late 70s when it ended, thank God. And I can't even remember half the things I got in trouble for, but it's certainly much harder for a diverse group, especially from a Carl background, from someone who doesn't speak English. I mean, the systems in different countries are so widely different to our Australian, the way that we live. And so it would be even more difficult for these people, for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, and especially, your personal experiences that you've shared with us as well today. So I definitely, I can relate to some of the points that you mentioned, and, being a part of a school is such a big, part of those young individuals' lives, and it has this really big impact on them as well. But we definitely have those strategies in schools and support groups at the moment to help, parents and teachers. But it's, just wanted to touch on and finally finalise this, just, touching on cyberbullying as well, especially right now during COVID and, the pandemic, that, how do you think we need to behave on the online platform?
That's a tricky one, because I've had a personal friend who is involved in a recent issue online. I won't go into it, but she was caught doing something with her car, and it was on television, and it went widespread. And she ended up getting a lot of comments on her page that were extremely, extremely insensitive. How do we change that? It's a real tricky one. I was probably out of 90% of those comments, I would say that maybe 5% were trying to defend, because they were just so nasty. Look, people are going to have their opinions. I guess in an ideal world, creating a family, especially children that are self-sufficient and are able to self-soothe and raise above this would be amazing. I wish I could go back to my young self with the strategies that I have now. I think teaching young people strategies and how they can empower themselves and become their own best asset is what would be great, and what would stop that from perhaps occurring. Or, like I always say, your opinion of me is an image of you, because you can't really, when you're actually bullying someone, or when you're doing something nasty to somebody else, you're just revealing who you are. You're not revealing who that person is. So I think people are standing up to bullies a lot more these days, I'm finding. So what can we do? What would you suggest?
Well, definitely, like you said, there's a lot more discussion to be had in this space. And, things are developing and changing, and there's definitely more conversations had, amongst students as well in schools about this topic, as well as, bullying is so broad. It can happen at school, but also online, when, it's very hard sometimes for parents and teachers to know until it actually blows up right in front of your eyes. It's like you mentioned, having those strong relationships, having those conversations with students so that they do feel comfortable to come and approach you as well. So I think that's one of the big key factors that we need to remember.
Yeah, I think also there's not enough extra curriculum that would be useful, and that's something that I would love to get involved in, because I've got my own little structure of where I teach young people how to strengthen themselves through a series of games and activities and introspection and homework and all that stuff. And it's based around creating the best version of yourself by looking at yourself as your best friend, as being your best asset, because, kids don't realise that they are their greatest asset. And so I wanted to spread the word I did a little advertisement that said I want to get on top of the hill and tell everybody who thinks they're different and who thinks they're not good enough that they are enough, because we are enough, and we don't know it. And when we get affected by bullying, there's a little voice that's saying I'm not good enough. But once we can, once you can be assured that you are, it doesn't matter what people say.
Right. You focus on yourself as well, and once you're comfortable, you can then also help others.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Antonella,
You're welcome.
For sharing everything that you have today. So, speaking to our audience right now, if they wanted to find out more and if they wanted to get in touch with Antonella Papa, where could they go, or where would you direct them?
Sure, they can go on my page. It's called Transformation with Anty. So it's Anty. That's my nickname. And or Antonella Papa on Facebook. Just give me a message.
Thank you. All right, and again, so if you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe on YouTube for Melbourne One TV, and we'll keep in touch. So thank you.
We'll do that. Thank you so much, Roxanne.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.